Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to SD Talks, a program of conferences organized by SD School of Design, University Ramon Llull, which takes place every 2 weeks. These talks are given by alumni or external professionals whose practice traverse the disciplines taught in SD in our school. And these are fashion design, graphic design, product design, interior design, audiovisual design, and design management as well. So the aim of the program is to get to know singular careers that can provide inspiration for the students at our school and beyond. So my name is Cristian Alonso, and I'm teacher of art history and theory at SD, and I'm the coordinator of the program SD Talks, and I will be the moderator of today's event. So I'm glad to introduce you all Mary Maggic. Mary Maggic is an independent artist and a researcher. She's an artist working at the intersection of hormones, body and gender politics, and environmental toxicity. Maggic frequently uses biohacking as a xeno-feminist practice of care that holds the potential to demystify invisible systems of molecular biopower. So she's going to talk about her projects, her collaborative practice-based, research-based, experimental collective projects. And the title of the talk it's we are living in the Estroworld. And so I'm just going to read quickly the description of the talk. So how do bodies queer at the molecular level? How is this queering inextricably tied to industrial capitalism? And is there a way out of capitalist ruins, one that has been further exacerbated by the pandemic? Combining body and gender politics and environmental toxicity, this talk centers on the concept of the open source estrogen, the underlying premise that hormonal molecules are ubiquitously all around us and available for us to hack, mutate, and become with. Through this process of socio-political excavation, we can begin to emancipate the hormone's molecule, unboxing its molecular mystique. So thank you very much for accepting our invitation. So I give you the word, and we'll be here listening. And I invite the guests, the participants, to keep their questions. They can. I invite the guests, the participants, to submit their questions via the chat, and we will answer. Mary will be happy to answer them at the end of the talk. So thanks again, everybody.
Thank you, Christian, for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation. Now I'm going to share my screen so you can see my slides. Okay. Okay. So we are all living in the estro world. So just to give a little bit of background about myself, I have a background in art and biology. And then I did the master's in media arts and sciences. And that's also where I did my thesis on open source estrogen, essentially estrogen biopolitics. So yeah, let's just get started. It's a very long presentation. So when I started open source estrogen, when I started the research in 2015, one of the first things that I did was I typed in estrogen into Google image search. And so right here, what you see here is just a screenshot of what I found on Google image search. And as you can see, there's lots of images of birth control pills, hormone replacement therapy. There's also images that code for femininity, like larger breast size, smoother skin. And so I was curious, how did estrogen become this black box fact that it codes for femininity? And the same with testosterone. How did testosterone become codified to code for masculinity? So I kind of saw this as like a black box, right? Like thinking as a hacker. These molecules are not just physical black boxes, but they're also symbolic and ideological black boxes because of what they symbolize as masculinity and femininity. So when I'm talking about biohacking, I'm not just talking about, the scientific or technical practice of hacking the molecules, but I'm also talking about hacking their socio-ideological symbolic meaning. So this is a really good quote that it says, we did not just find sex hormones somewhere in a lost corner like a desert island lost in the mist. We ourselves called sex hormones into existence. So that's a quote by Ian Hacking. So what does this mean? So I'm just going to give a couple of examples of these molecules that have this kind of biopolitical meaning. So in the late 1800s, there was this concept of organotherapy that was gaining popularity. So it was this idea that the essence of masculinity was found in the testicles. So this researcher, scientist named Brown Séquard, he actually took lots of extracts of testicles from various different animals like bull testicles or even chimpanzee testicles, and he would just create this, I don't know, like this extract, and he would inject it into himself, and he would claim that he revitalized his masculinity and his vitality. So there was this idea that there was some kind of gender essence that was inside of these organs, these physical organs. And then fast forward to the mid 1900s, we have the pill, right? The birth control pill. So I find this to be a very controversial molecule or very controversial pharmaceutical products because in depending on what body you're born into, um, in the first world nations, for example, access to the pill is kind of a symbol of of sexual liberation, of female empowerment, right? But today, it's kind of there's kind of more awareness about the pill being very bad side effects um, and also killing women in some cases because of these horrible side effects of mood disorders and things like that. So, but then on the other side of the coin, if you're living in a third world country and you don't have access to the pill, then women also suffer from having too many pregnancies and not being able to control their reproduction. So it is a very controversial molecule. It's primarily estrogen and progesterone. But what I find interesting is this kind of like biosurveillance that comes with this pill, because it's a way of regulating women's reproduction and also including this kind of this week of menstruation so that women's femininity could still be reproduced even though their reproduction is being under control. So they are estrogen and progesterone. They still continue to be the most highly manufactured synthetic compounds in the world today, which goes to show how much the companies, pharmaceutical companies, are profiting off of the pill. And I'm going to switch over now from pharmaceutical company to the agricultural industry. So around the same time, like 60s, 70s, there lots of environmentalists started to notice that frog populations and fish populations were starting to decline. And this was due to lots of reproductive malformations. So for example, in this image here, you can see that testicles are growing next to ovaries inside one frog. So in the beginning, the media was kind of blaming like suburban housewives that were on the birth control pill and like peeing it into the water supply. But later they realized that it was actually this compound called atrazine that's used as a pesticide in the agricultural industry that was causing these reproductive mutations in the frog and fish populations. So what I find interesting about this is that there is this like crossover of molecules, although they are different industries, although it's like pharmaceutical versus agricultural industry, but actually there's a connection between these molecules. And another molecule that I'll talk about is PCBs. So PCBs, they found it in the Marianas Trench, which is the deepest parts of the ocean. So this is one of the most prevalent, pervasive molecules in the planet. And the effects are similar to dioxin, which, as you know, was used as Agent Orange back in the Vietnam War. So there is like this chemical legacy that's left behind from exposure to these molecules. It actually lasts through generations and generations. So you actually have this legacy, this chemical legacy of people suffering from mutations, cancers, and other kinds of diseases from the accumulation of these molecules per generation. So it's quite serious issue. So why is all this happening? Like, why are all these molecules that are coming from industry affecting our bodies and bodies of non-human species? So just to zoom in on the micromolecular level, so this green molecule that you see on the screen, this is the model for the estrogen receptor. And what's really interesting about the receptor is that this is the same receptor that we share with almost all animal taxa. So all the organisms on the planet that have a vertebrae basically we all evolved to have the same estrogen receptor. So this is highly conserved. And another interesting aspect about the receptor is that scientists call it highly promiscuous. So it's kind of a funny term to call a receptor, but what they mean is that when a molecule is promiscuous, it means that there's many different molecules that can bind into the receptor. So it's like a lock that has many keys. So that's why, it's kind of this great paradox of living in the Anthropocene, because we didn't intend for all of these molecules from industrial capitalism to be communicating to our bodies, but they actually do. They're actually binding to our receptors and transfecting this change, right? So let's say like a xenoestrogen. When I say xeno, it means it's foreign. So let's say a xenoestrogen binds to the receptor. So one of two things can happen. The first thing that can happen is that it's displacing a natural hormone from binding into that pocket. And another thing that happens is that when it's in that pocket, then it starts a cascade of changes. So this is kind of, there's two mechanisms happening. There's disruption and then there's mimicking. So there's hormone disruption and hormone mimicking. So these are the two ways that the kinds of like queering action is happening at the molecular level. So I started to frame this this phenomenon of the Anthropocene, like living with toxicities. I started to frame this as a molecular colonization. And why do I use the term colonization? Well, I use that term because I'm trying to pose the question of, okay, so if we are colonized by these molecules, then what does it mean to decolonize our bodies and our environments and the planetary? So the effects of these molecules can be quite severe, like what I described before. But I think it's really important to remember that it's not just the reproductive effects that are caused by the molecules, but it's also linked to neuro and psychological effects like mood disorders, autism, ADHD, lower IQ. It's also linked to physiological effects, like it's linked to obesity, to diabetes, and it affects your metabolism. And for women, for girls, they're starting their puberty much, much earlier than before. And for men, the sperm count has dropped over 50% in, these are statistics for Europe. So those are the physiological effects. And then there are the reproductive cancers that I mentioned before. So all of these products that we're surrounded by, you know, from consumerist materialism to industry, extractivism, all of these processes of human activity on the planet, these are all leaching these molecules into the planet, into our bodies. And it's to this point that it's like so pervasive that there's no body on this planet that can avoid exposure to these molecules. So what do we do about this, right? So just as the body can be stolen, it can also be reclaimed. So I really like this quote. So now let's get into some strategies. So I'm deeply influenced by groups like Sub Rosa. So they were very active in the early 90s and 2000s. And what they did was they performed a lot of the biotech um, rhetoric and discourse. And by performing it, they kind of deconstructed its symbolic meaning. So the fact that bodies are commodified for biotech research. And so they did a lot of this kind of excavation into the biopower that is existing in these companies. And then there's also critical art ensemble and the notion of fuzzy biological sabotage. And I really like this phrase. And it came from a project they did called Molecular Invasion. And so what they actually did was they reversed engineered Monsanto's soybean crop so that it's no longer resistant to the pesticide. So it was kind of the first bioart interventionist project that showed that organisms could also be hacked and they could be reverse engineered for social resistance. So I find this to be very groundbreaking work. And I'm also part of a community called Hackteria. And they have this huge wiki of resources of how to do open source biological art. And I think it's really cool because I think bioart typically has this this image that it's very hard to do. You know, that it's like you have to collaborate for 5 years with a scientist to actually create a project, and it looks very expensive, but actually it's not. Like with Hackteria, like our kind of philosophy is that, you know, biohacking is not inherently progressive or futuristic, but it's actually as old as, you know, just fermenting foods in your kitchen or making cheese or making wine or beer or something. So it's almost like an ancient practice, ancient technology. So I really like their ethos, and I really like that there's this very non-hierarchical way of sharing knowledge. We're going to get into this idea of knowledge production. And from Hackteria, that's where I met Paula Pin and Cloud Kinky from Unipunk Lab, the Transact Feminism. So me and Paula, we actually did a lot of hacking together in the last years, lots of collaborations on this idea of DIY gynecology and kind of open sourcing these technologies for investigating your own body. So I think it's a really, really cool practice to look into. And it's also cool because in biohacking, it's so like white male dominated. And it's cool to do biohacking for feminist purposes, because I feel like that voice is not very common in the biohacking field. And this is an image of installation and kind of research gathering that we did at Media Lab Prado in Madrid. And we were hacking on open source estrogen, and we were doing all kinds of crazy experiments about like the chemical polarity of the molecules and how to extract them from the urine and how to locate them in water supplies around Madrid. So this was like a very cool, like open-ended kind of research hacking 2 weeks gathering. Here's some more images. And so there's many terms, I would say, that would describe this kind of practice. So there's hormone hacking, DIY biohacking, estrogen geeking, freak science. But the term I like the most is public amateurism. And this is a phrase actually I found from Claire Pentecost, who is a writer and also an artist. And she describes public amateurism as the idea of learning and doing and failing in the public sphere and removing the hierarchy of the layperson and the expert. So I think that there's a very strong political dimension in public amateurism because it's this process of knowledge production that is democratized and kind of disconnected from institutions, right? Because we think of institutions, especially laboratories, as closed doors, right? Like closed doors that we don't have access to. But also they create the dominant ways of learning, of knowledge production. So what happens when we as non-institutional people engage in that process of knowledge production and kind of take back that power? So I'm now going to go through some protocols that came out of this estrogen geeking estrofem lab kind of freak science practice. So the first thing I did was I was looking into biosensors because I wanted a cheap way to detect estrogenic molecules. So xenoestrogens in the environment or in the body, like how do we actually detect them and actually visualize them? So I was working with yeast biosensors, and these are actually transgenic yeast. So they have actually been transformed to have the estrogen receptor, the human estrogen receptor inside of their cells. So they're basically acting like extensions of our bodies because when they come in contact with anything that's estrogenic, then they will actually turn yellow. So this lets me know that this molecule that they came in contact with is estrogenic, that they are communicating to them. So for me, it was very kind of revolutionary to see the molecular semiosis that's happening, because this is an invisible process, to see the lock, the key going into the lock. Like this is an invisible process. And for me to see it was very, very revolutionary. And this is an example of a mobile lab that I was traveling around the world with to give workshops on the yeast biosensors. And what was really interesting was that I never got into trouble with the airport security because I'm carrying like very suspicious things, I have like petri dishes with transgenic yeast, and I have like all of these buffers and reagents, and some of them are even flammable. And I have like an incubator and all these other things that could look like a bomb, so but I never got into any trouble, so I thought that was kind of funny. Yeah, so then the next kind of thing that we were geeking on was this process of solid phase extraction. So when you're trying to detect from a river sample or from a water sample that's very dilute, you need a way to concentrate your sample into a small quantity. So we were using these peristaltic pumps. Do I have a picture of them? Or maybe I don't. Okay, so I'll just skip over this then. But basically, it's more of like a hardware process where we have like a series of peristaltic pumps that can automate the process of condensing all those molecules into a tiny filter. And then next we have a DIY column chromatography, which is a really good method that I like to use for extracting hormones from the urine. And as you can see, there's only 4 steps. So when I do this workshop, it really reminds me of like a kitchen recipe because it's so easy and so short. So what we do is actually we take silica gel and cigarette filters and create this environment that hormones like to bind into. And these are all ingredients that we can find like fairly easily. Like silica gel is what you use to absorb moisture. Cigarette filters And then I would say the hardest thing to find maybe is methanol, because methanol is a very, it can be dangerous. Like you can go blind if you accidentally drink methanol. So that's maybe the hardest thing to find. And here's an image of the mobile lab that I used for anything that has to do with extraction. So you can see that the column chromatography for urine is right there. And then there's also in this box, this gold box, is the series of peristaltic pumps that I mentioned before. So there's that. And then so as you can see, this image is actually from a gallery. So at some point, I had to retire my mobile labs and put them up for exhibition and have them exhibited as art objects, which I thought was kind of funny because they had a more practical use for me. So here they are again. I think these are different exhibitions, but yeah, they're displayed as art objects. And here's an image of what my workshops tend to look like. As you can see, it's like very, very messy. I like to embrace the mess because it's kind of going against this like white, sterile space that is the laboratory and also the gallery, right? These are all like white, sterile spaces. And they don't really show that messiness and that like contaminating kind of atmosphere, which is actually what biology is. Like biology is super messy and super chaotic and uncontrollable. So I like that these images really represent that messiness. And here's an image of the hormones when they're extracted from the urine. And at the end of the workshops, we do this like smelling exercise. So we go around like smelling each other's hormones that we got from the urine. And people usually have 1 out of 3 reactions. They say like, oh my God, it smells so bad. And then the second reaction is like, oh, it actually smells good. Like it smells kind of sweet, like caramel or something. And then other people say like, oh, I actually don't smell anything. And so smell is actually the least understood of all the 5 senses out of hearing and seeing and everything. Smelling is the least understood. And it's because every person has a different collection of nose receptors. So everyone's nose is different. So it's so subjective what you're smelling. But those people's reactions like, oh, it's disgusting, oh, it's sweet, oh, I don't smell anything, it's actually similar to the way dogs are smelling each other's asses, because when they're smelling each other's asses, they're actually smelling the hormones that are left over from the urine. So if you think about it, like when dogs are smelling each other's asses, either they want to fight each other, or they want to have sex with each other, or they just don't care at all. So I feel like the hormones, when they're taken out of the body, they're actually acting as pheromones. So these pheromones are influencing us, I think, in a very like ancient and evolutionary way, because we really lost connection with our sense of smell. So I think it's really interesting, this part of the workshop. And from this protocol, from this urine extraction protocol, I was able to create this kind of speculative fiction film called Housewives Making Drugs from this protocol. So I'm gonna try to play a short clip from the film. And this film is actually gonna be on exhibition at La Capella in the Multi-Species Imaginaries exhibition.
Hello, and welcome to our show. I'm Maria.
And I'm Maria.
And we are Housewives Making Drugs. On today's show, Maria and I are going to show you lovely viewers at home how to get hormones without needing that pesky doctor's prescription. That's right, Maria. We've concocted a recipe where we can reduce the estrogen that's naturally expelled from our bodies.
So you're saying that this recipe would allow us to circumvent the whole industrial medical complex?
And increase access to estrogen for trans women to gain radical body autonomy.
By sharing hormones and tapping into new systems of interdependent community?
And taking the phrase sharing is caring to a whole new level.
Wow. What do we need to make all of this happen?
This, ladies and gentlemen, non-binary, agender, and gender non-conforming folks, is the Estrofeminizer.
The only tool a real estrogen hacker needs to do her deed.
The best part is all these ingredients are cheap and easy to find.
Just how I like my man.
It's made up of silicone gel and cigarette filters layered inside a modified glass bottle.
As you can see, I found these items after a heavy night of drinking and smoking.
Never mind that overpriced laboratory equipment. This is the DIY contraption for all you biohackers out there.
Whoa, hold up. Biohacking? That sounds scary.
Well, no, just think of it as something as simple as making beer or wine or even cheese.
Okay, Maria, so you're saying that we have always been biohackers?
Exactly, Maria. So to get started, we're gonna need just one more very special ingredient.
We will tell you right after a quick but essential break.
So that was a film that we shot in LA, and it was with two trans femme actresses named Jade Phoenix and Jade Renegade. They actually had the same name, Jade. And so in the film, they have the same name, Maria. So in the film, we use a lot of like humor and satire because we were trying to make fun of this like Martha Stewart cooking show that's all about like females belonging in the domestic sphere of the kitchen. And so we decided like, let's kind of rupture this stereotype and make it all about housewives making estrogen in the kitchen. So that's kind of the film. And the last protocol I'll talk about is kind of a new one. It's working with fungi for bioremediation. So I was working with Paula Pin actually on this because we did a residency at Hanger in Barcelona. So, okay, so we found that these mushrooms, these specific species of mushrooms called, they're white rot mushrooms, they actually are able to break down plastic molecules and other kinds of similar toxicities. And the reason for this is because they have these enzymes that can actually break these chains. So you can see like these plastic molecules on the left-hand side, they are in a series of chains, right? So the mushrooms, they have the enzymes that are just breaking these bonds, right? So we don't actually know the byproducts of this breakage because the byproducts could still be toxic. But the fact that they are breaking them down into smaller and smaller pieces, it does signify some kind of degradation that's happening because, you know, we're all kind of worried about this metabolic indigestion of the planet, you know, like how is the planet going to break down all of these plastic molecules? But, you know, with certain species like the fungus, you know, maybe it is possible to speed up this process. So we were doing lots of experimentations, trying to cultivate it in coconut water and also in urine, and also designing some hardware that can shake the mushrooms inside of their solutions. And we kind of created this workshop where we extracted all these toxicities from everyday consumer materials like cosmetics and cleaning supplies and plastic bottles. And we created this like xenoestrogen cocktail and we gave them to the mushrooms. And we were kind of comparing. And then these are images from when we did the workshop another time, also at Hanger during Biofriction summer program. This happened last year. So we extracted all these toxicities and then we gave them to the mushrooms and we tried to compare based on this decolorization experiment, whether the mushrooms with toxicities would decolorize faster than the mushrooms without toxicities. Because we had this hypothesis that these mushrooms are actually adapting to this toxic environment that we're living in and actually breaking down molecules faster because their enzymes are being activated. So by the way, the decolorization, this blue color is actually from a synthetic fabric dye. It's like the same dye that they use to make blue jeans. So this is a very, it's a synthetic molecule that is also a xenoestrogen. And as you can see over time, over maybe 1 week or 2 weeks, the mushroom is actually decolorizing the blue color. So it's going from blue to like a kind of orange color. And I also used this in an installation I did in Indonesia, because in 2019, I actually spent 1 year in Indonesia, kind of researching the river pollution and plastic pollution crisis in the city of Yogyakarta. So this was a project that I call river gynecology, because the whole idea is how to investigate the river as if it's your own body. So I collaborated with a group called Life Patch, and they do lots of citizen initiatives in art, science, and technology. And they already had this river project since 2012. And so I just kind of joined the project as a collaborator and focusing on molecules. So first we did lots of river mapping. And as you can see, the river kind of cuts the city in half from north to south. And this river, it has very spiritual meaning. Like it has like, so when I talk to people who live along the river, they said that the river connects two spiritual kingdoms. The kingdom in the north, which is the volcano Merapi, and then the kingdom in the south, which is the South Sea. And what I find really interesting is that lots of the waste that we see in the river is actually domestic waste. So lots of people just like throw their domestic waste like directly into the river. And so it just made me think that they see the river as other from them. And so when I asked the people living along the river, like, what do you think of the river? Like, do you think it has any spiritual meaning to you? They actually said that, oh, this river is not actually a river. It's a highway for spirits to cross from the two spiritual kingdoms. And I thought this was really interesting, because in many other cultures, a river can be something that it has agency, that is alive, that feels pain. There's all these cultural mythologies about rivers, but for them, the river is just a highway, like it's not actually a river. So I found this really interesting. And I created this kind of mandala projection. So I collected a lot of trash from the river. This is actually like real trash that I collected, and I took pictures of them and I just animated them into this mandala. A mandala is actually a traditional Buddhist practice of creating order out of chaos. And so I was constructing this and I animated it because it kind of shows this kind of all of these different recombinations that happen inside of our bodies, because all of these products that we consume, they break down into smaller pieces and they enter back into our bodies, even though we throw them out into the environment. So it's kind of showing how we are not like fixed bodies, we are constantly glitching and we're constantly creating new combinations inside of us. So I'm going to kind of switch gears because at some point in my practice, it became less about the biohacking and more about the strategies, if that makes sense. Because for me, the biohacking, it kind of revealed all the molecules that are around us, right? Like we were able to see what was previously invisible. And that's already like a very political act, right? But, my question now is, well, how do we live, act, and care in this permanently polluted world after now knowing these scandalous levels of estrogen all around us? You know, so what's the next step after knowing, right? So I think from knowing, that's when you can start worlding, right? You can start fictioning. So I'm using world and fiction as a verb, right? Like as an act. So how do you now start to generate your new world or your new fiction about the world? So back in 2016, I came across this article where scientists created this new species of fish that was actually a hermaphrodite fish. And then in the title of the paper, they called it a hopeful monster, which I found really interesting because you have this queer organism that has both ovaries and testicles. And it is a monster, but then they call it a hopeful monster because it's able to reproduce by itself when it cannot find a mate. So it got me thinking, well, why can't we also see our bodies as hopeful, even though they're very queer and very monstrous, right? So, because I look on the internet a lot about kind of the cultural reaction to endocrine disrupting molecules and all of these toxicities, and a lot of times I find these articles that are very problematic. So, for example, this article, this person was writing like, oh, I don't think it's right that the government is putting birth control pills in the water supply because it's making all the men gay, and we need both men and women to propagate the human species. And maybe we should talk about this more than, you know, foreigners crossing our borders, you know. And this is kind of like a crazy, you know, it's like a really crazy article because you have like homophobia, transphobia, and xenophobia all in one article about the issue of toxicities, right? So I got really interested in kind of like the cultural reaction and the social discourse around toxicities and about our bodies changing, right? So there's so much fear and panic about our bodies changing. So why is that, right? And then what about bodies that already don't fit in this male-female binary system? So for example, this is an illustration of when a doctor delivers a baby, and then the baby has kind of ambiguous genitalia. And so there's literally like a measurement system. So if the clitoris is between 0 and 1 centimeters, then it's a girl. If the clitoris is between 2.5 and 5 centimeters, it's a boy. And then in between, then it's like neither a boy or a girl. So they have to actually perform a surgery to make the child female or male. So this is, again, like a very violent practice that is coming out of this fear and panic of a body that does not fit into its own taxonomy. And who is creating these taxonomies, right? So in response to this kind of fear, I created this kind of a participatory performance project called the Molecular Queering Agency. And I did kind of an upgrade of this project last year, but I'm going to play, let's see if this works. Okay, so so we did this performance with myself and 9 other strangers that I never met before. And the whole idea of the Molecular Queering Agency is that it's supposed to gently guide participants towards the process of queering. So kind of acknowledging our bodies as like changeable and mutable and very responsive to the environment. And we also go through the process of extracting hormones from our own urine. So that's the sculpture that you see in the middle, this kind of like aluminum fountain, basically. So we're performing this kind of ritual where we're actually worshiping the urine. And these are strangers that I never met before. And I just asked them to put on these uniforms and to trust me with their with their bodies and with their urine. They all have to give a urine sample. And we all just engage in this ritual, in this experience that we're only sharing with each other and no one else. And we are just saying yes to being part of this permanently polluted world, right? So one really critical point in this performance is when we put on these masks, these oxygen masks, and these masks are connected to molecules that were extracted from other participants. So when they put on these masks, they're basically saying yes, you know, they're consenting to being exposed to foreign molecules. And that's a really big point in this performance, because none of us are really asked if we want to be part of this world, right? Like no one asks us, you know, do you consent to live in this permanently polluted world? You know, because we're just born here. We're born here and it's already polluted. And so the performance is actually giving that choice, right? That consent to say, yes, I'm part of this world and I am becoming with this world. So it's one of these strategies I found for neutralizing that fear, like neutralizing that panic, right? Because that's one of the only ways that we can survive in this world, right? We have to free ourselves from these heteronormative constructs, right? So I'm just going to go to the next slide. So here's some of the hormone extractions. And then we also did some choreography that I found, that I discovered from kinesiology therapy, which is, kinesiology is a way of releasing trauma from the body, because trauma is stored in the body the same way that, you know, all these toxicities and microplastics are also stored in the body. So the whole like choreography of the performance, it's modeled after this, I call it a 3-step process for living in an increasingly queer world. So the first step is toxicities. You live in an alien landscape that is colonized by hormones. Step 2, semiosis. You are already alien. You have hormones and plastics in your blood and in your urine and in your fat cells. So you're already alien. Step 3, subjectivities, is asking, do you want to be more alien than you already are? So let me just check on the time. I'm actually gonna stop here. I'm really sorry I couldn't get to the last project, but I just wanted to leave some room for questions. So yeah, so Christian, like if you can let me know if there are any questions, then I can kind of end here.
Can you see me?
Yeah, I can see you.
Okay, I don't know. Well, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. I think it's yes, let's do that. We don't have any questions so far, but I have plenty. So, but perhaps it's also a nice opportunity for you to actually tell us a little bit more about this last project of you, so that we have a glimpse of what are you busy with now.
Okay, yeah, sure. So the last project that I wanted to talk about is actually an ongoing project called Genital Panic. And Genital Panic is it's like a very long-term project, because I plan to collect a large database of 3D scan genitals. So I'm doing like a population study almost. I'm doing lots of like data science and stuff like that, but I'm trying to make it queer feminist population study. So what do I mean by that? So this is a software that I was kind of co-designing with Charles Stiles, who is a creative technologist. And we created this software for 3D scanning genitals. And it also asks for some basic demographic data, like your age, your gender identity, and the distance between your anus and your genitals. So in lots of papers that I've read about toxicities, scientists, they really like to measure the distance between the anus and genitals. And they noticed that this distance has been getting shorter and shorter on a whole like population scale over time. So the more exposure that you have to plastics, then actually the shorter distance you have. And then there's also like a gender dimorphism in this data. So for example, men or male bodies, they tend to have twice the distance of female bodies. But then now male bodies have the same distance as female bodies. So it's like, so this measurement, I see this measurement as a tool of patriarchal science for defining taxonomies, right? Because I asked the question before, who is actually creating these taxonomies? So my idea is that, well, to make it queer feminist, what happens when we create this database, we create our own definitions, and we do not prioritize the gender assigned at birth. We prioritize your gender identity. So whatever you identify as, it could be different from your gender assigned at birth, because, why should it matter what a doctor says when you were born, by looking between your legs? Right. So far, I cannot find any population study that is modeled like this. So it's interesting because these population studies, they have the power to define our realities, right? So this is kind of a practice in like how to define realities from the bottom up, right? So the whole purpose of this database is to redefine genital aesthetics. And it's like semi-performative, but semi like realistic also, because we are dealing with actual bodies. And the reason why it's taking me so long to do this project is because I'm actually looking for collaborators. So if you're interested, please let me know. I'm looking for people who can design databases, who have experience dealing with privacy, right? Because we don't want people's identities to be traced back from their 3D genital scans. So yeah, please let me know if you're interested. And I've also done several workshops about this project to collect these genital scans. But I'm still in the process of creating an actual database. So yeah.
Thank you.
Then, yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, you would finish. Are you done?
Yeah, I think this is the last slide. Well, actually, this is the last slide, but
okay.
But
Sure, go for it.
Yeah, I'll just leave it like this. Yeah.
Thank you again. Yeah, I have two questions. One that is about the methodology, right? And because we are like here, this conference is framed in this program, which is organized by this design school. So I think your talk and your practice is super like inspiring in so many different ways, like. Well, not only like speculative design, one might say, but also like how, what is the purpose of design? Solving problems, right? So problems which are of a different nature and order. So using, design, art practice, I don't know anymore how to describe it, and that's a good thing for social resistance. I think it's great, and I think it's very inspiring, and I think it broadens and opens up possibilities for the students to see different careers, different initiatives, different let's say practices. So I have my question about the method. I really like the word you coined it. I don't know if you were the one who coined it, this word of workshopology. Define it by yourself. I downloaded your thesis, your master thesis, and I because I wrote about your practice in articles, in my thesis as well. So yeah, you define this concept of, or this practice named workshopology as a collaborative hands-on experimentation and as an iterative process of and design strategy that takes feedback from its own mishaps, accidents, and participant experience in order to develop new methodologies in the future. So I think if you can expand a little bit more on that, I think it would be great. And and then I will ask you I don't know if you want me to pose a question about the content or later on after you reply.
Yeah, so workshopology is actually a term that we started throwing around a lot in this kind of Hackteria network that I mentioned before in my presentation. And so because we do lots of very informal workshops with each other, like whenever we have this gathering with each other. And workshopology, it is like this very iterative design methodology, because every time you do a workshop, the next time you do that workshop, you're trying to do something different, or you're trying to or you get feedback from the previous workshop and you try to improve, or you try to, or maybe disrupt it even more. So I really like this because a workshop is constantly evolving. It's not like a fixed workshop that you keep repeating over and over again. So that's kind of how I created so many projects around urine extraction. You know, like I have the Housewives Project, the Molecular Queering Agency. You know, I also use it in the collective I'm part of called the Aliens in Green. So this one like urine hacking protocol, I reused it so many times in different artistic contexts and different artistic interventions. So that's what I mean. It's like when you gain that intimate knowledge of the material that you're hacking, you know, in this case, my material is estrogen or hormones, then it's like that intimate knowledge actually has a million possibilities. So so I really encourage that kind of, you know, even if you're in the field of design and it's more about, you know, solutions and outcomes, you know, I would encourage you to keep it more open-ended. You know, I think that's kind of one of like the power of art, is that it's kind of embracing this radical unknowingness, right? The same with toxicities. Like, we don't know how our bodies are going to become, you know, over time. We just don't know. All we know is that our pre-existing definitions are not working anymore. So so yeah, I would encourage this radical unknowingness in your practice.
Well, thank you so much. And yeah, I want to keep this sentence that you said, that we don't know what our bodies are becoming. You know, we cease to be, and we in order to become with. And this other question I wanted to ask you is about one might say a little bit more like in relation to the conceptualization of the feminizer, right? Because this video that you show, our fragment, it's going to be part of my exhibition, and I really like it, and I think it's very yeah, the way you appropriate this cooking show, right, which is very feminine, you know, it's very like, and how you like turn it upside down. But somehow I'm going to be a bit you know, pausing controversial, because I don't know if if it's a bit problematic to call it estrofeminizer to a device that you are designing in order to first like obtain, acquire all these synthetic molecules, um, which are estrogenic molecules that are, we know that are, after hearing your talk, we know that these these hormones are being gendered for many decades already. So one of your goals is to really like degender, or like actually it's one of the strategies actually of your projects, to degender them, so to become more alien, because to actually intensify or alienify, I don't know how to call it, but isn't that a bit kind of, maybe it's just the word, maybe we should call it estro alienizer or estro alter, you know what I mean? Because then it seems like you want to escape from this kind of codification, gender codification, and somehow to call it estrofeminized, it seems like you want to go and obtain another a capture, another transcendental, like identitary capture. So I don't know. I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. I guess that the estrofeminizer in that film, in the context of that film, it's kind of showing the absurdity of these kinds of like product placements, advertisements that happen in cooking shows, and this kind of like, and also the fact that capitalism also is always trying to profit from disasters, like this current disaster that we're facing, this all of these permanent toxicities. Capitalism is always trying to profit off of that, the same way it's profiting off of the pandemic. So it's kind of like an example of a product that would come out of the alienation that we're facing, right? Because it's like, oh, well, since there's hormones all around us, at least you can use it to feminize your body if you are trying to transition, for example. So that was kind of like the idea of calling it the estrofeminizer. But I completely get your point of this kind of these like gender qualifying terms and trying to break away from them. But that's what performance is doing, performing that gender qualification is also revealing the absurdity of it. So yeah.
Cool. So let me see if we have questions. No, we don't have any question. I'm gonna bring my students to see the exhibition that we will open next week in Art Center La Capella, and they will be able to watch your video, and yes, just to like immerse, like immerse themselves into your work. So I'm pretty sure we'll have time to further exchange, and talk about your projects. I really think they're super interesting, super necessary. I think your talks it's your practice is, let's say, although you get the influence, or you claim that you inherit super process practice, and I think this is another like vision or another perspective, is a kind of like updating frameworks and stuff. So I really think I'm pretty sure it was very inspiring for the students, and I think you can finish here, and then they will be also they could watch their video afterwards, and then maybe we can will contact you if they have questions, if we want to chat and continue our conversations. Does that sound right?
Yeah, sure. Sounds good.
Cool.
And thank you again for the opportunity to present. And if your students have any lingering questions, you can always send them my email.
Perfect. Cool. Thank you so much. And I hope we see each other soon.
Yeah, I hope so too. And good luck with the
Bye
exhibition.
bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. Bye bye.